You're now listening to the Boys in the Booth podcast with your hosts, Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams. New episodes every Monday on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Hello and welcome to episode 129 of the Boys in the Booth podcast. This time it's just myself, Chad Melbourne, no Casey or Harper joining us today, but we are joined by a very special guest. You probably saw it in the title, Mr. Jonathan Kyriacou. And before you ask yourself, who is this guy? First of all, that means you didn't listen to previous episodes where John joined and was fantastic. But I'll just give you a little bit of a background on this guy because he's been a fantastic guest and he's a great buddy of mine. So a few years ago, John was a amateur scout for the Ottawa 67s in the OHL. After that, John went on and worked for the Toronto Maple Leafs for a summer, and then now he just recently got called to the bar, and he's a practicing corporate lawyer in Toronto, and he's a great buddy of mine. We used to play hockey together back in university, so there's a connection there. Lots of stuff going on. John is an expert at all this stuff. We're going to get into the Maple Leafs today, but before we do, John, how you doing, man?
I'm good. Glad I could kick the other two guys out of here and take over for a little bit. So looking forward to talking some Leafs here.
Yeah, I mean, that was the plan all along. I just had to sneak in an episode here to make it official. But yeah, so that's what we're going to be doing today. We're just going to be talking about the Leafs. I've titled this episode Our Ideal Offseason for the Maple Leafs. Obviously, the two of us are big Maple Leafs fans, as much as we sometimes hate that title. You worked for the team, you've had experience, you've talked to guys like Kyle Dubas, Lou Lamoriello when he is there, Brendan Shanahan, and, the executive group. So you might have sort of an insight into what this management group is thinking, maybe, or you might just have your own ideas. So we're going to get into all of that now. So I want to talk about a few burning questions. I want to talk about cap space and off-season decisions. I want to talk about who the Leafs maybe should sign this offseason to improve the team, what their biggest needs are, maybe if there's any trades that you can come up with. I have a couple. Don't know if you're going to like them, but I'll propose them by the end of this episode. And then to close out, I just want to give our ideal lineup going into next year, whether there's a few holes or not, just to kind of see where we're at after the loss in the first round again, and kind of see what direction we want the Leafs to go. So all of that considered, let's get into it. John, the first question I wanted to ask was, and this is an easy one for you, this is kind of top line here, do you think the Leafs should blow it up or run it back?
Yeah, this is a tough one, and it gets tougher every year. I mean, I think just with the group you have, you can't completely blow this up. You have, even though it hasn't worked yet, you do have one of the better, more talented cores in the league, in my opinion. Those aren't players that come along all the time, or that you're going to easily replace with draft picks. Or even replaced through trade. So I don't think you have a choice here. The contracts are what they are. You're going to have to work around them. But if you want to win, this is what you have. And so I think they're going to have to make it work. So to me, it's more of a reset, a retool, as they've kind of done in the past, and hope that the formula works. If this keeps happening over the next couple of years, I would say, especially as some of these contracts wind down, then maybe that's a question that eventually needs to be considered. But right now, you've got them under term. They're here to stay. They're in their primes. And when I'm saying they, it's obviously Marner, Matthews, Nylander, Tavares, Morgan Reilly's on a long-term deal now. So those are the guys that ultimately need to pull you through.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Morgan Reilly there, because I think he's really solidified himself as a key piece to the core. And I remember when we were at a game, I think it was opening night this season, and we were talking about it kind of like, that was before Morgan had signed his extension, and we were talking about the likelihood that he would. And I remember you turned and basically said to me, who else is going to play 25 minutes a night for the Maple Leafs? And that just made me think, oh yeah, Morgan is like extremely important, maybe even more important than a couple of the forwards in the core four. So that's I think it's really the core five, so I'm glad you mentioned that. And that was a lob ball, because we know that Kyle Dubas is going to run it back. He's basically said that. I think this is going to be his hill to die on, this core group of players, and so that was a bit of a lob ball there. We know what they're going to do, so I wanted to start off easy.
Starting off easy here.
Yeah. Okay, so next, I was just wondering what you think the biggest need for the Maple Leafs is this offseason if they're going to run it back with this group. How do you fill out the peripheral of that group, and what is their biggest need?
Well, I'd say it's a two-part answer for me. First off, what is the biggest need? And this is almost one I didn't necessarily project at the beginning of the season, but it certainly is now, and that's goaltending. You've got Jack Campbell, who's a UFA, Peter Mrazek, who had what can only be described as a nightmare of a season this year between injuries and performance. And so right now, going into next season, the Leafs goaltending tandem is currently Peter Mrazek and Erik Källgren. That's simply just not good enough to win. I don't think that would be a surprise or a shocking statement to anybody. So that's what needs to be addressed first. We'll get into, I'm sure, more specifics as to, free agents that you think may be, or that we think may be a good option for this team. But goaltending is something that needs to be solidified before you focus on anything else, especially with the fact that you're looking for a number one, and that's going to eat up a lot of your cap. And then second, I would say, as you've just alluded to, it's going to be a lot around the periphery of this team. I thought at times, ultimately when it comes down to it, and you see it in the finals right now, it's the top players who are going to pull you over the hump. You see Cale Makar putting up big numbers on Colorado. You see Nikita Kucherov, Andrei Vasilevsky, Steven Stamkos. You go down the list of big name players who've had clutch performances for their team, and that will be the same for the Leafs if they want to get ahead. But you do need those periphery players, and case in point, Nick Paul, Game 7 against the Leafs. He's the one that comes up with the clutch performance, and you're going to need those over the course of the playoffs. The Leafs' fourth line, in my opinion, this year just didn't have that capability.
I agree,
and not to anybody's fault, in my opinion. Jason Spezza is obviously retired and was at the end of his career, and I thought gave you some good spurts throughout the season, but with age comes decreased productivity, and that's what we saw out of him. Same with Wayne Simmons. I think he's one of the few players on this team who has some bite, will go in the corners, will drop the gloves if need be, but Wayne Simmons right now is not, of course, the Wayne Simmons that we saw with the Philadelphia Flyers. He's probably not even the Wayne Simmons that we saw when he first arrived in Toronto before the I believe it was a wrist injury that he had. Mm-hmm. And before that was quite a productive player. So I think you're going to need to find some replacements at the bottom of your lineup, who know their role, but can also be effective and can be effective for the long term. There's a lot of turnover coming at that bottom of the roster, I believe, if you look down the list of UFAs and even a couple RFAs. So right now, aside from those guys, I think you have a couple other guys currently slotted into roles who, may be a little bit more undefined in terms of their career and their specific role on the team, and that's never really helpful for anybody when that's the case.
Yeah, so talking about the fourth line, do you think there are some guys from the Marlies who graduate, or do you think they just need some more experience there, guys who know that that's their position and they're not trying to claw up the lineup? So I'm thinking about guys like Abruzzese, I'm thinking about Steves, I'm thinking about maybe even Joey Anderson, who just turned 24. It feels like he's been in the Leaf system forever since that trade for Andreas Johnson. But there's a few guys there, even in Nick Robertson, and I want to get into him later, but do you think there's a spot for some of those guys, or do you think they just need a complete turnover?
I think ultimately you need both, because all these teams that end up being successful, you have internal competition. Right now, if you don't sign any free agents, if you don't bring any guys in on PTOs, essentially what you have is 3 open spots on your fourth line for guys from the Marlies just to walk right into, and you're not even going to make them earn it. I think, at least in my opinion, as somebody who has not seen a lot of the Marlies recently, but watched games when guys similar to who you've just named, the Abruzzes, the Nick Robertsons, so on and so forth, have come up and played. They're not at the point where they should just be gifted roster spots. Those are guys who need to commit to a role, who need to understand what they're being brought in to do, which may not be the same as what they do at the AHL level or what they've previously done in junior or college. And they need to battle. They need to, if they do make that team, if they get there, they need to feel like they're one game away from being sent right back. That's what ultimately will bring out that the play and the compete that you need from those guys. And in my opinion, none of those guys, while they are, I think, on track to be effective players, none of those guys are at the point of their careers where they should just be handed a position on an NHL team.
Yeah, like I think about those guys like Abruzzese and Steves, for example. I think they can be effective fourth line players, similar to like what an Engvall was a couple years ago for the Leafs when he came up. But I don't think, obviously, they're difference makers, and you need other guys on a fourth line like that. And then talking about Robertson, I might as well get into this question now I had about him. Like, do you think he's a full-time Maple Leaf next year? And if so, does he strictly play in the top 6? Because when I saw Robertson play last season, and even the year before, like he was in the playoffs and stuff, I watch him play, and if he plays on the third or fourth line, I think he's just completely invisible. If he plays, 9 minutes a night, even 12 minutes a night or something, I think that's a waste. Like, I think he needs to get a full-time opportunity in the top 6, but I'm just not sure he's ready yet. So how do you feel on Robertson? Do you think he's close? Is he there?
I agree. I do think he's close, but ultimately close, at this stage just kind of means you're a bit of a, I guess for lack of a better term, a tweener, somebody who can go up and down, but you're not really, defined in either. I think in terms of answering your question of whether he's a top 6, well, name the top 6 that's coming back next year. It's Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares, probably Kerfoot, unless you move him, but right now he's on contract, and Michael Bunting. Is Nick Robertson better than any of those 6? No, he's not. So then you're talking about, okay, can he play on your third line or your fourth line? And the game now is different, and roster construction is different than it was 15 years ago, even 10 years ago. Like your fourth line doesn't have to be these big bruisers, your Colton Orrs, the fourth line that we saw when the Leafs lost to the Bruins in 2015. But you still, as I've kind of hammered down a few times now, you need to have a defined role, and you need to know what your job is when you do see the ice, especially if you're going to play fourth line and play, 7-8 minutes a night. Those 7-8 minutes need to be effective. Nick Robertson, in my opinion, hasn't showed me that he's, a player who's going to play on your shutdown line, or is going to kill penalties, or is even going to provide some energy in the time that he's out there. I think he's shown potential as a skilled player, as a goal scorer. He's got a great release. He's a good skater. But I don't know if I see a position for him to thrive in the role that he might be, more comfortable in right now on this team. So, for me, I think I'll be looking in the preseason for whether he can adapt, whether he can change his game a little bit to fit a role that may be open for him. And if he can't, then that's a player with some potential that you may look at moving in a deal. But he's a good prospect. He's been plagued by injuries the last couple seasons, which is unfortunate. But if you're the Leafs, you can only hope that he's gonna be even 75% of the player that his brother is down in Dallas.
Oh, that'd be incredible, wouldn't it, if he was even remotely close to what Jason is? So that's what I wanted to ask. Like, if he doesn't crack the roster in a role where he's going to benefit out of camp, do you think it makes more sense for the Leafs to explore trade options then, when they're kind of admitting that he's not good enough to play a top 6 role? Or do you think it makes more sense in the off season to explore trade options before you even have the opportunity to evaluate him with the lineup? Because the Leafs are obviously in their window. Like, they have to win now. Like, they essentially have another 2 years of 2 of their core players under contract, and then 3 years after that, Tavares and Marner come up. So it's like the window is closing. As much as I hate to say it, and that's not saying it will definitively close. I think they find a way to get extensions done with those players. But my point is, would it make sense to explore trade options for Nick Robertson to bring in a player to play in the top 6 who will make an impact? Because we know the second line struggled with scoring last season, and that second line mostly composed of either Ilya Mikheyev or Alex Kerfoot on the left wing, and then Tavares and Nylander, which just hasn't worked, especially when you look at their 5-on-5 production numbers. I believe in their last 2 seasons, their 5-on-5 expected goals is like a really high percentage. It's like nearing like 55-56%, something like that. I'd have to look it up. But their actual goals, I believe they're getting outscored by a couple goals at 5-on-5. So like, for 2 of your core pieces to put them together in the second line, it's just not working. So I wonder if exploring trade options with your key piece, like your golden chip, and that's Nick Robertson, I wonder if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. And ultimately, nothing's ever owed to anybody at the NHL level. You have to do what's best for your team. But I think in this case, you've put a lot of time and effort into developing this prospect. And yes, there's been some injuries, and he's had a few opportunities to play at the level here and there. But I would still like to see what he can bring, with a full summer of training here, come into the off season. And if you're Sheldon Keefe and Kyle Dubas, then you want to, give him as good of an opportunity as you possibly can as a player who you have high hopes for in your system. Whether that's putting him on the third line and saying, hey, figure it out. You're going to be playing some tough minutes here. Like, you're still going to have your chance to score 15, 20 goals, 25 goals on that line. But you're going to also have to play some defensive zone minutes and maybe kill a penalty here and there, see what he's like there. And, you also have the option, as you've just kind of said, like, if something's not working in your top 6 and you want to, retry the Nylander experiment where you move him in with David Kampf and guys on that line, then that's one of the first guys for Nick Robertson, that you'd be looking to move up and put in that role. So I think if it was me, I wouldn't be shopping him this summer. If you get a call and it's an offer that is difficult to turn down, then you do what you do. But I think you just let the summer play out with him. There's no rush. You have time on your side. See what comes out of training camp, and if things don't work out there and he ends up getting sent back down to the Marlies, then my guess, as somebody who's dealt with hockey players in the past, is that it may not even be your decision as to whether you want to trade him or not. You may get a call from the agent. So
yeah, see, like, first of all, I'm glad that you said it's probably prudent to hold on to him, because I feel the same way, and I felt the same way about Timothy Liljegren too over the years, and we saw what kind of player he turned into this past season. And I'm happy that we kind of rode it out with this player, and I feel like they should do the same with Nick Robertson. But the reason I asked that question is because Leafs media, man, like, anywhere you look, it's just like, trade Nick Robertson for a goalie. And like, later in this episode, we'll get into it. I have a couple mock trades for a goalie, a couple in particular, and because I may be on that train, but I don't think Nick Robertson.
I'll just say it interrupts. Sorry, and we'll save the meat of the discussion for later. But you're not getting a number 1 goalie straight up for Nick Robertson.
No,
so.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, but I mean, it seems like that's what everybody's saying. It's like 25th overall pick and Nick Robertson and something else, and then it's like, holy, what if Robertson turns into, like you said, even 75% of what his brother is, and then And then it's like a Mason Marchment situation, you know, and he excels somewhere else. Not that they could have known how good Marchment was going to be at the time, but
yeah, well, I mean, I guess in that case, you know, you just hope for something similar that happened with Jack Campbell, where you trade Trevor Moore along with a couple other pieces, and he's become a very effective player for the Kings. He was great in the first round against Edmonton, but you also got a number one goalie back, or your number one goalie back in that deal. So, yeah, I mean, if that's the case, then, you know, you wish all the best to the player. Hopefully, he develops into something, and it's a good deal for both sides. But yeah, we'll save that discussion for a little bit here.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about, you know, filling out this roster around the core because they're going to run it back clearly. Just looking on Cap Friendly, they have roughly $7.8 million in cap space with 17 players under contract. So they have some work to do. There's some important free agents, both UFA and RFA here. So I just wanted to go through every free agent quickly on this team. And I want you to tell me what you think the likelihood that they re-sign is out of 100%. So we'll start with Engvall. Pierre Engvall is an RFA with arbitration rights. John, what do you think the likelihood is that he re-signs with Toronto?
I'm going to go... I think I'm going to go 80%. Pierre Engvall, to me, he's okay. I think, you know, Chad, I'm not his biggest fan. He's someone who I thought actually had a pretty decent season at the end of the day, but, you know, he's someone I don't feel like fits into really any role particularly well. I wish he used his size a little bit more. You know, he's not a goal scorer. He's not a penalty killer. So what is he? But, you know, he can get you 15 goals. He takes up a roster spot, and he takes up a roster spot for particularly cheap. You know, and I think he's not going to be somebody who's commanding a lot here. And ultimately, you know, whether I think he's a super effective player or not, he's the type of player who you can kind of plug and play. He's not going to necessarily hurt you, and he's not going to eat your cap. So it's kind of a player that you almost need around the Leafs, in my opinion. You know, of course, if it ends up in arbitration, then you're going to argue low and he'll argue high, and hopefully it falls more in your favor. If you can get him, you know, south of 1.5, in my opinion, then I think you probably do that.
Yeah, I had Engvall at 75%, so we're on the same page there. I think they bring him back for his versatility. I think he's better defensively than a lot of people give him credit for. And, you know, he chipped in offensively a bit this year. It was sort of a breakout year for Engvall. I mean, it was a career best in many ways. So I think they bring him back. I agree also. I think, you know, anywhere between 1.25, which is, I think, what he made last season, between that and 1.5, I think would be, you know, it'd be a good deal for a couple years. I think would make sense. Andre Kasha, again, another RFA with arbitration rights, made of glass, but when he's healthy, he was really effective for the Maple Leafs. So what do you think the odds are he comes back?
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly there, Chad. And I'm going to say for those reasons that it's 50% for me. I could see it going either way. Yeah, I thought he was great when he played, but, you know, you can't rely on him to stay healthy. You know, and he's not somebody who's going to come at you know, he's not going to make a ton, but I don't think he's going to be on the cheap either. He might fall somewhere in the neighborhood of, you know, $2.5, $3 million, maybe slightly more. You know, so I think that's somebody where, you know, especially if you're able to walk away from an arbitration ruling at the end of the day, depending on, of course, the specific rights he has and who elects arbitration. You know, if you don't like that ruling and you're able to walk away from it, or even, you know, prior to that, if you're just, you know, want to explore your other options, then take a look at what else is out there. I think, you know, even though he was effective when he played, he is replaceable. There's other guys in the league who are as good and bring similar elements to their game as Andre Kasha. But yeah, to me, it really comes down to the fact that you're, you know, even if you sign him, you know, you're going to get 50 games out of him.
Yeah, I think that's the tricky part. I think, and also when I look at the lineup too, I just don't know where he fits. And I guess it depends on other players too. Like, we're going to get to Ilya Mikheyev, whether he resigns, because I think you can only grab one of those two players. And I think Mikheyev is better and he's been healthier. So I put Kasha at 25% chance that he's back. I just don't see where he fits. Like, if he's going to play the fourth line, I don't think you can justify paying him $3 million, even though
I agree.
He is pretty versatile and can play in the top six if you need him to jump up. I just don't think he's an everyday, middle six player on the Maple Leafs. So 25%. Colin Blackwell, UFA. I've got him coming back at 0%. I don't think there's a chance they bring him back unless he is extremely cheap. I just don't think it makes sense for the Leafs. I think they explore other options and try to find a better identity for the fourth line like we talked about. What do you think about Blackwell?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I'm going to leave the door open a little bit more than that. I was going to say 20%, like still very unlikely. But, he's a guy who... I think you can sign for pretty close to league minimum, in my opinion. And if you can do that, then to me, there's no, real negative to having him as a guy who's your 12th, 13th forward, probably your 13th forward. And you can come in and, move up the lineup a little bit as you need him, do a little bit of spot duty. But yeah, when he was here, he didn't really make any sort of presence felt. He didn't change the identity of the fourth line at all. Again, not that you need mutants on your fourth line. You used to, but he's a smaller player as well. So yeah, I'm going to go pretty unlikely for that as well. You never know. Leave the door open a little bit for me, but I think, you need a little more identity on, especially in your bottom six.
Yeah, like, don't get me wrong. I liked Colin Blackwell. I thought, in the playoffs, he had some jump and he seemed to have a little bit of tenacity to his game, which I kind of liked. But yeah, I just don't know, again, where he fits. He's one of those guys where, it seems like he has the skill and the, the kind of grind mindset, work ethic, but he's just not big enough to play an effective role, on the fourth line. And again, not that, like you said, you need mutants. I just think the Leafs need to go a different direction on their fourth line. So it's unlikely that he'll be back. Okay, we'll do two easy ones, and then we'll finish with three hard ones, and then we'll get on to some goalie talk after this. So we'll group these two guys together, Liljegren and Sandin. They're both RFAs with no arbitration rights. I said for both, 100% chance they come back.
Yeah, I think it has to be 100%. These are two of your better young players in your system. They're RFAs. You're going to be able to get them at a decent price, in my opinion. They're only getting better as well. So, 100% to both. Yeah.
Do you have an estimated cap hit or deal that you think either of them could sign? I think for Liljegren, it makes sense to maybe give him $200K raise roughly, like still keep him under $1 million, maybe for 2 years or so, just so he can establish himself more as a player. I think Sandin will get the most between the two of them. I just genuinely don't know what he's going to make. Do you have sort of an estimate for that?
Yeah, my guess would be for both of them, it probably starts with a 1 in terms of their cap hit. Liljegren you may be able to dip a little bit under the $1 million mark, but even if it's $1 million, that's, chump change in the NHL now. It's what it is. Sandin, I think, will, as you said, will get the higher of the two. He may push a little closer to 2. But there's still more to be seen from him. He didn't get into the playoffs. Obviously, no real fault of his own this year. He dealt with the injury and never got back in. So before, making a more substantial commitment, which I do think he has the potential to get on his next contract, you're going to want to see a little bit more. But yeah, both those players should be relatively easy contracts in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, some money's got to come out. Like you're gonna probably move on from Justin Hall and maybe even a Jake Muzzin. We can talk about that too if you'd like. I don't know really where he fits in now if you want Sandin playing top 4 minutes, but Sandin, I think maybe it looks like a Travis Dermott contract where I think he was 1.5 for 2 years. I could see Sandin going 1.75 for 2 years, something around that range. So okay, 3 tricky ones here. We already mentioned this guy, UFA Ilya Mikheyev. polarizing player, I think, for a lot of Leafs Nation. Some guys absolutely love him. Some guys think he can't finish. This year, he put up, some decent numbers and was healthy, which was a plus. So even though I think some people think he's priced his way out of Toronto, I still have the Maple Leafs re-signing him at 75%. What do you think?
I'm gonna disagree with you on that one. I think I'm gonna go again. Never say zero, but I'm gonna go 5%. I'm gonna go really. And I'm somebody who's very in between on Mikheyev. I think this year especially he was effective in his role. He's a fast skater. He can kill penalties. But ultimately, I think on the other end of the spectrum, he's a low hockey IQ player, as I would describe him. I would not be betting on him scoring more goals in any of his future seasons than he did this season. I think he's kind of reached his limit there. He's going to be somebody who I think is more tailored to a third line on a good team. But I do think that the market for 20-goal scorers is competitive out there, and I personally just see, one of 31 other teams making an offer that far outdoes what the Leafs could possibly do. And good for him if he's able to get that. Then it's a no-brainer to take it. It's similar to what happened with Zach Hyman, where I think both sides look at it and say, yeah, we would love to keep you, but you'd be crazy to turn down that offer, and wish you well. And he goes on, and Zach Hyman's had success with the Oilers through one season. Could see something similar with Mikheyev, but I don't see more of a ceiling than he already has. I think he is what he is, but the craziness of free agency. I'm just picturing somebody right now giving him a contract that starts with a 4, and I just wouldn't justify that if I'm the Leafs. Yeah,
well, that's what I was going to ask. What do you think a contract looks like if he does get overpaid like you're talking about? Because again, that's the worry with Mikheyev. If you can bring him back for a reasonable number, that makes sense. I think he's another player who's pretty versatile, extremely fast, kills penalties, not too bad defensively on that third line with David Kampf, and maybe it's Pierre Engvall as the other winger. But no, I hear you. I think maybe there's somewhere in the middle that we can meet for likelihood that he comes back, but I hear you there. So agree to disagree on that one.
Yeah.
Two more difficult players here. Ilya Labushkin. Let's start with him. I put Labushkin and also Jack Campbell. I guess we can do these together. I put them both at 50% because I have no idea if either of these players is coming back. I don't know exactly where Labushkin fits now that Mark Giordano has re-signed for 2 more years. Despite playing different sides, I think there's just a logjam on defense, and someone has to go. Maybe it's Labushkin, but I mean, he was playing with Morgan Reilly as well, so it seems like he can play up and down, your top 6 on the back end. So that's a player I really don't know if he comes back. And then obviously Jack Campbell. So what are your thoughts on those 2 players?
Yeah, I'm interested to hear what your percentage would be on Labushkin. For me, I'm going to put it at 6. Well, I guess you said 50%.
Yeah, 50.
So
yeah.
Disregard that last statement. For me, on Labushkin, I'm going to go with 60%. I'm going to go a little bit higher than you, just because I think he was a really effective pickup for the team.
I agree.
He was really steady. I think he surprised a lot of people, including myself. Not a lot of people knew about what he brought before he got here. And then, as you said, he was playing with Morgan Reilly in some key times, and I thought was pretty effective at doing that. And at the same time, he's 28. He's established. I don't think he's going to command a huge contract. He may be able to essentially step into the Justin Hall money at around $2 million, maybe a little bit more, but I don't think I could see something with a 3 for him. So if that's the case for me, I think the logical answer would be to bring him back. If you see there's a bit of a log jam and you think you want to have Liljegren and Sandin in your lineup every night or close to every night, then that's a call for management to make. Maybe they walk the other way, but there's not too many players on the market right now who I think you can look to and say, yeah, he would be more effective, especially at the cost where you'd get him as Labushkin was. And so I would do everything I can to try and make sure he's in my lineup next year. So that's Labushkin. Jack Campbell, I'm gonna agree with you there, 50%.
I really don't know what to think on him. Really.
I don't know what to think either. I think you've got to try everything in your power to bring back Jack Campbell. And I know he ended up becoming a little bit polarizing in the second half of the season. Obviously much, different performance than it was in the first half. But he's your best goaltending option. In my opinion, the other options on the market are not significantly better. Marc-Andre Fleury's 38, 39 now. I don't think Darcy Kemper is a significant improvement, in my opinion, over Jack Campbell. I think he's better, but I don't think he's substantially better. Ville Husso, same thing. I don't think he's an improvement on Jack Campbell. He lost his job back to Binnington in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So for me, I think, obviously it's going to come down to how much he's asking for. That's going to be number one. But if it's something that the Leafs can work with, which my guess would be something maybe around the $4.5 million range, and you're able to get rid of the Peter Mrazek contract, which may be easier said than done, then I think, similar to what I said about Labushkin, you got to try everything you can to bring him back. But we'll see.
Yeah. So I agree with a lot of what you said about those two players. With Labushkin, the reason I was 50-50 on him is because, like I kind of alluded to, I don't really know where he fits. So when I just look at the top six right now, Reilly, Brodie, you probably want playing together, right? You've got Reilly, Brodie, Sandin, Muzzin, and Giordano, who all shoot left. And then you've got Labushkin and Liljegren, who shoot right. I don't think there's any world next season where Liljegren and Sandin are not in the lineup on a given night if they're healthy. I think you have to play those guys because I think they're your future, period. And they proved it this year that they were both really good in limited playing time. So then that leaves me with either Labushkin or Muzzin playing, on the right side or whatever. Giordano can play the right side if you want to do that, because we know Muzzin doesn't like doing that. So it just leaves me between those two players, Labushkin and Muzzin. I think, they play effective roles, and they kind of play a similar role in the sense that they can be relied on defensively and on the penalty kill, and they can make a good first pass if you need it for the most part. But I don't really see a world where both of those guys are back in the lineup on a nightly basis, because I think you have to play Liljegren and Sandin.
Okay, so we're gonna make some good podcasts here, because I'm gonna disagree with what you said.
Okay.
And I don't think you need Liljegren and Sandin in your lineup all the time. I think in an ideal world you would, because that means your young players are taking another step. But if you look at just what happened a month ago when the Leafs were playing Tampa, Sheldon Keefe took out Liljegren, partway through that series because he didn't trust him, and he put Justin Hall back in the lineup. And I think all of us would agree that Justin Hall's probably played his way out of Toronto.
Yeah.
But if Sheldon Keefe was announcing to the world, like, hey, this guy who has drastically underperformed this season is someone I still trust more than this young player, to me, I can't sit here and guarantee that Timothy Liljegren plays every single game come October. I hope he does. And I hope the same with Sandin, because he still, as I've said, has stuff to prove. But I think, for me, the more prudent play would be, if we have one too many defensemen, they'll figure it out, come preseason, come the first part of the season, as to who's going to be in the lineup and who's not going to be. And if you think, your younger guys and Labushkin and Muzzin, they're all competing for spots, and they all deserve to be in the lineup, every night, then you make a move at that time. But for me, I just don't think Sheldon Keefe and Kyle Dubas would be super comfortable coming in with a top six defensive group that features both Sandin and Liljegren, based on what we just saw in the first round.
Okay, and fair enough. You're right. Like, Keefe would not put Justin Hall in the lineup if he trusted Timothy Liljegren more than he trusted Justin Hall, which makes total sense. But my response to what you said is, what happens if game 1 of next season, it's Sandin who's on the bench? Because like I said, there's a log jam on the left side. And I think that benefits Liljegren more than it does Sandin. So, if you've got Reilly, Brody, say Muzzin, Labushkin, or Reilly, Labushkin, Muzzin, Brody, and then Giordano, Liljegren, and that leaves Sandin out, I don't know if that's good for the player. And if he's sitting game 1, knowing how good he is or how good he thinks he can be in the future, wouldn't that disgruntle the player? Like, aren't you managing personalities here at this point when every player here on the back end can play?
I agree. It will disgruntle the player. But the NHL is not a development league. If you're concerned that, Rasmus Sandin, isn't going to be living up to his potential because he's sitting in the press box, then, that's not something that Sheldon Keefe needs to necessarily worry about. That's going to be for Kyle Dubas to figure out. So in my opinion, I think it kind of goes back to what I just said, where it's, right now, when you're envisioning your roster, I don't think that the guys running the Leafs can sit here and say we are comfortable with both of these two guys in our lineup, so much so that we're going to lose a player who we were very comfortable with in our lineup, including a guy that has played, with our number one defenseman on our top pair. Mm-hmm. And so, if you come down to game 1 of the regular season and Sandin is scratched, but you don't think he should be because you've seen him take a huge step up through preseason and he's doing everything right in practice, then, I think that's something that probably gets sorted out over the first part of the season and ultimately ends up resulting in somebody getting moved, come the first part of the season. And that might not even be Labushkin. That could be Jake Muzzin.
Yeah.
If Labushkin is outperforming him. So my preference in building a team is depth. Bring as much depth in as you can. Let the pieces fall where they may, and then figure it out after. So I'd rather be in that position than, starting game 1 with the 6 guys and Sheldon Keefe coming out or talking to Kyle Dubas after night 1 saying, hey, that guy right there, whoever it is, cost us 3 goals tonight. We got to go find a D.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point. Good teams are built through their depth, so it makes sense. You want to have guys who can fill in because, again, there's going to be injuries too. So you need to have guys who can play. But my biggest worry, and I know this is galaxy brain, and we've been talking about this decor for a while, and we can move on here soon. But I know this might be a bit of a galaxy brain, conversation. But what happens if signing Ilya Labushkin, a player who on a lot of teams is not on your top pair, or on some teams he's not even in your top 4? What if signing that player ends up in Rasmus Sandin being traded? I would hate to see what that trade-off looks like, and I just that worries me. That worries me.
Yeah, I mean, as a fan, I think that's worrying, but I think if, without trying to offend anybody, I would say that if you choose 28-year-old Ilya Labushkin over 22-year-old Rasmus Sandin, next season, so much so that you're trading the latter, then that's just going to be poor player management, asset management. By no means am I suggesting that bringing back the one should result in the other leaving.
I know.
I think it's just a matter of whether those guys are ready to be in the lineup every night. If they are, great. If they're not, then whether it's Labushkin or somebody else, Sandin's going to find himself in the press box watching that guy some nights of the year. But yeah, I would never suggest that they should be looking at trading Sandy, and I think that would be crazy. He's one of your top young players coming in, and if that happened, then fan base would probably have some questions, unless they got a huge return. Yeah,
well, that's the thing too, because what if and I mean, again, this is just hypothetical galaxy brain, but what if they get a player to play in the top 6? Who knows? But My worry is that you disgruntle a player, if you scratch him game one. But anyways, we've been dragging this part on. Let's move on here and let's talk goalies, and then we'll round it out with a mock trade here involving goalies, and then we'll talk about our ideal lineup, and then we can wrap up because we've gone a bit long here. So
sounds good.
Okay, trade targets and net. We both said Jack Campbell is about 50-50 to return to the Leafs. If he doesn't return to the Maple Leafs, we talked about moving Peter Mrazek's contract. Could be easier said than done. Maybe you've got to attach the 2024 second round pick that you've got or something to move that out, which, it's not ideal, but at the end of the day, it's magic beans and you need the cap space. So if they were to get a goalie who is not Jack Campbell, who do you think they should target? You mentioned Ville Husso, you mentioned Darcy Kemper, a couple other guys I kind of pulled out of left field. They're not better than Jack Campbell, but they could maybe provide a good backup position. And I don't really know what that looks like, but Scott Wedgwood and Anthony Stolarz. So there's 4 guys. Who are you most intrigued about there? Or is there someone else that you're looking at on the market?
Yeah, I think in terms of UFAs, for me, it would just be the guys you named, Kemper, Ville Husso, who, as we've already talked about, I don't think are improvements or substantial improvements on Jack Campbell. Those are more lateral moves. Ville Husso, that one's a little bit more risky than Kemper, in my opinion. But still, yeah, kind of a lateral move. Comes down to, as everything does at free agency time, how much they're commanding, what the market's like. There's, of course, other teams looking for goaltending who are going to be competing for those services as well, and you just have to hope you're not outbid for any of those 3, Jack Campbell included. So those would really be the only 2 I would consider from that class. I've already said Fleury just a little bit too old. I have
just no interest in him.
Yeah, looking down the list of some other guys like Thomas Greiss, Georgiev, Martin Jones, Braden Holtby, none of those names should be intriguing if you're a Leafs fan. I think if you're going to go the trade route, then the one name that gets thrown around a lot in the media right now is John Gibson. I don't know if there's any truth to those rumors, whether he would actually be willing to leave Anaheim, come to Toronto. He's making $6.4 million a year as his cap hit for 5 more years, I think it is here. Yeah. 5 more seasons. So it's obviously a hefty price. I don't know if you can make that work. He's 28 years old. He's been, pretty good throughout his career. The last 3 seasons, although he's been playing on a non-playoff team, his save percentage has been below league average, which is, maybe slightly concerning, especially if you're going to be asked to give up a lot for him. Yeah. But that's the one name in the trade market that comes to mind. In terms of backups, yeah, I think those are good names that you've mentioned. Wedgwood has been a fairly, solid 2-3 guy for a couple years now. Anthony Stolarz is a little bit more unproven in my opinion, but sure, could deserve an opportunity. I think, no matter what you're looking for here in a backup, I think, Jack Campbell played 49 games this past season. So you're going to be looking at somebody who can fill the void of the other games. He's never, of course, surpassed 49 games. So you're looking at somebody who could, in an ideal world, maybe play up to 30. Whether those 2 guys could remains to be seen. But I certainly don't think it's anybody in the system that they have now who's the answer.
I completely agree. I think, the hype about Joseph Woll has kind of died down recently, and Eric Källgren kind of came out of nowhere, and I don't think that he's capable of being a full-time NHL backup next season. So I think the idea is to get someone to push Källgren down to a 3 role, and then like Mrazek, if he returns, I think fans will go nuts. You have to do something to move his contract, even though at the start of the year, I was a big Peter Mrazek fan and I was just waiting for him to turn things around, but it just never happened. It never, came to fruition, and maybe it's just circumstance or injury or the system that the Leafs play. There's something going on there, and who knows what it is. But I think if he returns, that would just be like, Leafs fans would go nuts. So I'm glad you brought up John Gibson's name, because that was the mock trade that I have prepared here. But before I read it to you, I wanted to ask you who you think the most valuable trade pieces are for the Leafs this offseason to go and get a goalie with, if that's the route they choose, if they can't re-sign Jack Campbell, or even if they do and they want to get another guy to work into a tandem with, or if they just need to get a backup or whatever. So what do you think the most important or the most valuable trade pieces are on the Maple Leafs right now, and would actually be likely to be involved in a trade for a goalie?
Yeah, it's good that you put likely in there.
Yeah.
Say probably Nylander at his contract, and somebody who's not named Matthews or Marner. So,
yeah.
But I don't see the Leafs moving him for a goalie, in my opinion. So, yeah, you're kind of looking at more depth guys, which is always tricky. Is you're kind of playing yourself back into making a trade for a guy who's a little bit more unproven, or maybe a number two at the moment, kind of like when you traded for Jack Campbell, and you're giving up guys like Trevor Moore, to get him, who's clearly somebody who was further down your depth chart at the time. So for me, I think it would be some of the prospects that we spoke about earlier, Nick Robertson being one. He's a guy who hasn't found his footing yet, still has some value. And is somebody who I think, certain teams, especially teams who may be a little bit more thin in their forward group, would place some value on. Who knows? For instance, the team that comes to mind, like Columbus. Columbus is a little thinner in terms of their high end talent in their top six. Who knows what's going on with their goaltending tandem they have there? But we've heard about Jonas Korpisalo rumors for what feels like a couple seasons now.
Does that interest you, Korpisalo?
Not substantially, but that's the type of goalie I think you're looking at trading for if you're going to give up. Like Nick Robertson is not an A prospect. He's probably a B plus prospect. I'll give him B plus, but
I would agree.
Time's running out, so you're not getting. Like Elvis Merzlikins is clearly the number one in Columbus. You're not picking up him for Nick Robertson, and I'm just throwing out it as an example. I don't even know if Columbus wants to move Korpisalo anymore, but in my opinion, that's the kind of guy you're getting back in a trade involving those types of pieces. So somebody like that. Other guys with the Marlies, I don't know. Like Abruzzese, in my opinion, probably has less value than Nick Robertson. So I don't know if you're moving him. I wouldn't want to do this because I think he's a good defensive prospect. But Topi Niemela is somebody who may have some value as well. But what I'm trying to say essentially is you're not going to be moving one of your core pieces. Your depth pieces probably don't have a ton of value. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of looking at trading prospects and picks if you're going to pick up a goalie, in my opinion. Yeah.
What do you think about a guy like Alex Kerfoot? What kind of value do you think he has around the league?
I think he's got some value. Like that's another guy I guess you could probably throw in as a guy you can move for a goalie. Trying to think of what I would value him at, but he's a second or third line player on an okay contract.
Yeah.
He's got, what has he got here? He's got 1 season remaining at 3.5, 27 years old. You can move him, but I think my point would stand. Like, I don't think Alex Kerfoot on his own is attracting a number one goalie in return. Like, yeah, maybe you get slightly more than you would get if you're moving Nick Robertson on his own for a goalie, or Nick Robertson in a pick, let's just say, but as the main kind of player asset in that deal. But it would be Alex Kerfoot plus something if you're looking at getting a John Gibson type out of Anaheim.
Yeah, and then you're wondering, are you even better losing your depth, to get a goalie like Gibson who hasn't been good for the last, 3 years or so. But okay, I'm glad we're on Gibson and we're getting close to wrapping up here, because I have a mock trade and it's not fully finished, but I kind of just wanted to see what you thought of this value here for John Gibson. So the Leafs receive Gibson because I think, we've seen this playoffs and last actually, that you're really only as good as your starting goalie for the most part. Andrei Vasilevsky, in games that he's faltered, Tampa got blown out, 7-0 last game. Igor Shesterkin, games where he didn't play well, it didn't go well for the team. Ville Husso struggling for the Blues, and then Jordan Binnington coming back in. Going back to last season, Carey Price was basically the only reason Montreal got to the final. So you just see this time and time again where a goalie gets hot in the playoffs, and the whole theory of a tandem working throughout the regular season kind of goes by the wayside when it comes to playoff time, because you're just playing one guy and you're only as good as that guy. So that's my theory. I feel like I've kind of moved in that direction after these last couple years. I was a big believer in the tandem, but now I just don't know. So John Gibson to me has been an attractive option because I think he's better than his numbers should suggest over the last couple years. So Leafs receive John Gibson, makes 6.4 for another 5 years. Like you mentioned, that contract is kind of scary in my opinion, but like I said, I think he's better than his recent numbers suggest. And in return, the Leafs send their 25th overall pick for this year. They send their 2024 second round pick, because that's the only second round pick they have for the next few drafts. Then I think it has to be 2 of your medium, say B tier prospects. So I don't know if you have this guy in a B tier, but I look at a guy like Ronnie Hirvonen. Second round pick in 2019. I think he fits the bill. And then someone else, whether it's Mikhail Abramov, I think he might be a B- or C+ prospect.
I think he's probably a C.
Yeah, or someone like that. I think there needs to be a bit more value added, but that's the deal for me. What do you think Anaheim says to that?
Yeah, I don't think that's a terrible suggestion by any means. Like, those are, even though it's a late first round pick, it's still got some value to it. Second round picks are always valuable as well. I don't think that's a terrible suggestion in my opinion. And I think if you're the Leafs, the thing you're looking at is the contract, of course, it being 5 years at 6.4, last 3 seasons. As I agree with you in saying that I think Gibson is better than his numbers, but notwithstanding that, his last 3 seasons have been .903, .904, .903 save percentage.
Yeah, and the advanced numbers have been bad too.
Yeah, and so that's would scare me a little bit, but I do think, if I were to guess, that is a realistic ask from Anaheim, a first, a second round pick, and 2 B prospects. So it's scary. It's scary, but I do think there's some realism to that suggestion.
Yeah, it is. The contract's a bit scary, but okay, here's another guy. This was rumored a couple days ago. Sergey Babrowski. Reportedly, Florida is willing to retain 50% just to clear cap space. He has 4 more years left on his deal, and obviously they have Spencer Knight coming up, so they're, this is like the time for them to move Bobrovsky. They have some key free agents to sign this offseason as well. So are you interested at all in Sergey Babrowski at $5 million per year, because he makes 10 right now, so 50% retained for another 4 years? And what do you think that would cost? Because I think it would be less than, maybe even significantly less than a John Gibson trade.
Yeah, I think at 50% retained, you'd have to at least think about it. Sergey Babrowski has not been fantastic for Florida. He was okay this year. His save percentage was around league average at .913.
Yep.
He played 54 games, so he was the starter there. His track record speaks for itself in the past.
Yep, two-time Vezina winner.
Two-time Vezina winner. Now he is 33 years old and probably past his prime. I think that's fair to suggest. But yeah, $5 million. I think that's something you have to look at. Especially if you're weighing your options at $5 million Sergey Babrowski versus a $4.75 million Jack Campbell. Let's just say that's something you gotta look at in terms of the value. It's always very tricky, in my opinion, when you're talking about retaining salaries. It throws off the trade value so much, especially if you're talking about retaining
$5 million,
$5 million, half of his contract. That's a big ask from Florida. So in my opinion, I think with that considered, you're probably looking at, if you're the Panthers, you're looking at getting a pretty decent sized return. I don't know if it's as big as the one you just suggested for John Gibson, but I don't think it would necessarily be far off. Maybe it's a first and a B prospect, or a first and 2 B prospects. Who knows? But yeah, when you're asking a team to retain that much in salary, they're not just going to hand him over.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think the only reason why I kind of suggested that it would be significantly less value to acquire Babrowski than it would Gibson is just because I don't think Florida has any leverage. I think teams know that they need to move on from his money if they're going to re-sign some key players, like a guy like Mason Marchment, like we mentioned him earlier, but what is he going to sign for this year? And, they've got a few other key guys as well. So I don't know. I don't feel like they have much leverage, but I'm just curious to see if they do move him, if they are able to retain 50%.
No, you're definitely right. Like they aren't dealing from a position of power if they're desperate to get out of that contract. Like, even though you're asking a lot for them to retain it, it is reasonable to suggest that, they don't get full value even at $5 million, because they're so desperate to move on from him. But, if you're dealing with a team, if Florida's dealing with a team that, also has some desperation on their side, like if the Leafs enter August 1st and they're looking at Peter Mrazek and Eric Kallgren as their 2 goalies, then that's a little desperation in my mind. Edmonton Oilers, if you're at August 1st and all you've got in front of you right now is Mike Smith and Stuart Skinner, potentially the same thing. So I think Florida, as you suggest, on its face, not dealing from a position of leverage, but if you find a desperate partner like that, it all may even out in the wash.
Yeah. Okay. And last thing I want to go over here, ideal lineup for game 1. I know we're just kind of, throwing darts at this point and seeing what we hit, but what does your ideal lineup look like for the Maple Leafs on game 1 in October?
Yeah, I'll say ideal and somewhat realistic.
Yeah.
So I don't think, based on, we just talked about Ilya Labushkin for 15 minutes. So that can kind of tell you where maybe I'm standing with their D. I don't think there's going to be any substantial changes on defense right now. I think the only real change that you see, in my opinion, is Justin Hall doesn't come back.
Yeah.
But I think the other 7 that are listed on Cap Friendly right now, that being Reilly, Muzzin, Brody, Giordano, Liljegren, Sandin and Liljegren. Is that 7? Yeah, yep. That's 7. I think those are your D come night 1. Goalies, scary, very scary. I think in an ideal world for me, notwithstanding the second half of his season, I think Jack Campbell's in the net night 1. Number 2 goalie could be I think it's got to be somebody completely different. I don't know exactly who that is. Maybe it's for your sake we'll throw in Scott Wedgwood.
Sure.
Who's
I like
fine.
Stolarz better. But
or Stolarz.
Yeah, someone like that.
I don't think that's not going to make or break your season, in my opinion. So one of those two, but the other two guys, Mrazek and Källgren, aren't on the roster for me. Forwards are trickier. Maybe you can help me out a little bit here, but we've named the six. Well, I think it's fair to assume Kerfoot's probably there, unless there's a trade. I think in an ideal world for me, like the other guys under contract currently are Simmons, Abruzzese, and Clifford. To me, Clifford and Simmons are not guys I want in the lineup every night.
Same. I don't even know if I want Simmons to come back at all. Like, I know he's good for the locker room. I just don't think he's very effective anymore.
No, I don't disagree, but I think if he's back, he's got one more year. Yeah. 13 forward, play 30 games this season, and then don't see him in the playoffs. I don't think he's hurting anybody, and the guys like him, and he can come in and, he's not super effective, but he's going to take up a spot. So I think you see him on the roster. Yeah. But there's a lot of open spots. So I mean, I guess Pierre Engvall is probably back as we discussed.
Yeah. A guy with a spot is David Kampf on that third line.
Yes. He'll be there. Yeah. David Kampf. Forgot about David Kampf for a second. He was effective. I'm trying to think of some free agents here that may be worth.
Yeah, and I mean, John, we don't even have to get into the weeds here. I was more so just expecting, what you think the group coming back is going to be, and then it's okay to say, we've got some holes, and that's kind of what I think the Leafs have is a fourth line with 3 spots open, and then maybe a spot on the third line.
Yeah,
and then on the back end, it's those 7 guys if they bring back Labushkin. And in net, like you said it, Jack Campbell, if he can come back, that would be ideal. And then someone else has a backup to kind of change things around there, because Källgren, I think, needs to be pushed down, and Mrazek cannot return. So that's essentially what I've got. The only difference is I've got John Gibson starting between the pipes, just because, for fun. But
did you take Kerfoot out of the lineup then, or was it a prospect going the other way?
No, it was the deal I proposed. Just need to think of a second guy. I mentioned Hirvonen. You could throw Niemela in there as well, because I think he's also in that class. But I like Niemela, so I don't know. Maybe it's a Ty Voigt,
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with everything you said. You got a whole fourth line there that I think is one big hole. Probably a third line winger as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, even just looking up and down the UFA list that's available on Cap Friendly, first page, there's 50 guys listed. I don't know if I see any of these guys in the Leafs lineup come opening night. Not even because I don't like them, just because a lot of them I think will get more money than they have to offer. So they're going to have some maneuvering to do. Hopefully you have some guys who can prove me wrong and are willing to take a step up from the Marlies, because they're cheap and show some good development. But I think, kind of going back to what we said at the start, in an ideal world, you have some competition come training camp. Make guys compete for spots and figure out your depth a little bit right now, because there's not enough up front as it currently stands.
Yep. Okay, fair enough. Is there anything you want to add before we wrap up here about the Leafs?
No. I mean, this is the year. This is it. They're going to get past the first round, right?
This is it. We just have to keep saying it.
Yeah.
We just have to keep saying it. Okay, final thing I'm going to ask you. Who wins the Cup, and in how many games?
Oh, man. I mean, I will admit I was hoping for a three-peat. 2-0, being down 2-0 to Colorado, in my opinion, is a lot different than being down 2-0 to New York.
Yeah.
So I think I'm gonna have to take Colorado, but I think I'm gonna say 6. Tampa's they're not gonna go easy.
Yeah. All right, I'm sticking with Tampa and 7, just because my bank account needs that, my Bet365 bank account. So, okay, well that's it for our deal off season for the Maple Leafs this year. Thank you so much for listening to episode 129 of the podcast. Thank you, John, for coming out and doing this. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to go to www.boysinthebooth.com and get some merch. We'll be selling all summer long. Thanks again for listening. Cheers.
This has been another episode of Boys in the Booth with Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams. New episodes every Monday on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Connect with the Boys in the Booth on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Boys in the Booth. Visit boysinthebooth.com for show details, and don't forget, you can become a patron of the podcast for just $1 a month at www.patreon.com/boysinthebooth.